Israel, greetings. I respectfully acknowledge that I live, work, and volunteer on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of Stolo, people of the river. I also respectfully acknowledge that many of the participants are joining from different unceded, traditional, and ancestral lands that form part of Coast Salish lands. So long before Canada was formed, the Stolo people occupied the land from the Fraser Valley to Lower Fraser Canyon of British Columbia. So I thank the elders who have looked after this beautiful land of mountains, rivers, lakes, diverse flora and fauna, and try to learn from their sustainability efforts. And this is the land of Halkemelem, the upriver dialect. I'm grateful to be living on Stolo land, the land of Matsqui Nation and Sumas Nation of Stolo Nation. At this point, I would like to take a minute to pay tribute. Indian Farmers and Workers Support Group stands in solidarity with the Indigenous peoples of Canada, in particular with the Kamloops, Squaxin First Nation and Cowessess First Nation during their time of immense grief following the discovery of unmarked graves of children in the grounds of former Indian residential schools in Kamloops and in Merivale, Saskatchewan. Thank you to everyone who has joined us, particularly as panelists and then as attendees this afternoon. It's a trying afternoon. The temperatures are soaring. It shows it feels like 44 degrees here where I am joining you from. And this event planned by Harinder Mahil and Ajay Bhardwaj as part of the Indian Farmers and Workers Support Group. And everyone in the support group came along to contribute ideas and so on. So it is my pleasure that all of us are gathered here, and I pass on the baton to Samir. And before that, I would just like to say a few introductory words about myself. I'm Prabjot Parmar. I teach in Fraser Valley. And volunteer extensively in anti-racism, secularism, and democracy organizations. Presently, I am president of Sansad, South Asian Network for Secularism and Democracy, and a member of Indian Farmers and Workers Support Group. Samir, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Prabjot. My name is Samir Gandesha, and I'm the director of the Institute for the Humanities. I, along with Prabjot, are executive members of the recently founded West Coast Coalition Against Racism, which was one of the many brainchildren of the late Professor Chinmoy Banerjee, very dear friend, colleague, and comrade. Miss him very much. I would also just like to thank the. I'd also like to thank Ajay and Harinder for bringing this event together, and I'd just also like to acknowledge that they organized it on behalf of the Dr. Hari Sharma Foundation and the Indian Farmers and Workers Support Group that Prabjot already mentioned. It's co-sponsored by the Institute for the Humanities at SFU, the South Asian Studies Institute, the University of Fraser Valley, the South Asian Network for Secularism and Democracy that you already heard about, Vancouver Democracy, Equality and Secularism in South Asia, DESA, Winnipeg, Punjabi Literary and Cultural Association in Winnipeg, the Gurcharan Singh Memorial Lecture Committee in Vancouver. So today, what we have set for you is a very exciting panel that will look at the the forms of solidarity offered by Canadian labor organizations and political representatives for the Indian farmers and workers who are mounting an enormous battle in India right now and have been doing so for a number of months. So May 26th, 2021 marked the completion of 6 months of the Indian farmers and workers' protests at the borders of the national capital of New Delhi against the 3 contentious farm laws. These farm laws were passed in September 2020 by the Modi government without consultation or debate in the midst of the first wave of COVID pandemic and lockdown. The farmers oppose these laws because they will empower corporations to seize their land, jeopardize their livelihoods, create food insecurity, and deepen the agrarian crisis facing the country. These farm laws are part and parcel of neoliberal policies expropriating people's resources, labor, and livelihoods worldwide. The global significance of this largest and longest nonviolent peaceful protest by the Indian farmers has been warmly appreciated by labor unions, political activists, and farmers everywhere. Many city councils in Canada, such as Vancouver, Victoria, Burnaby, Port Coquitlam, Surrey, among others, along with many Canadian labor organizations, including the Canadian Labour Congress, Federations of Labour, UNIFOR, have passed resolutions or issued statements in support of the demands of the Indian farmers. I think that the stakes are probably best, the stakes of the farmers' strike are perhaps best explained by Achin Vinayak, who suggests in an article written for Frontier Weekly and republished recently by the Socialist Bullet in the following terms. Certainly, if this strike is successful, the farmers' movement will halt for some considerable time the neoliberal corporate strides into Indian agriculture. Defeat, on the other hand, will accelerate that push and further consolidate the ties between the BJP and capital. The key is not just continuing the occupation or mounting periodic demonstrations, marches, and solidarity events, but mass strike action. This form of action would directly hit at the authority of the government and affect their big business backers where it hurts the most, namely in their pockets. The central trade union federations, barring of course the BJP-controlled Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh, have extended support to the farmers' struggle and carried out solidarity actions. But these federations are controlled by their respective party political masters, which makes it harder to forge basic unity among workers. And this is the key point I think he's making. Indeed, the way that more than 40 farm unions and other bodies have managed to work together should be an object lesson for trade union federations. And on that, I'll just now pass it over to Prabjot to begin the introductions. Prabjot, over to you.
Thank you, Samir. It is my privilege to introduce Councillor Jean Swanson, who's known to many, and particularly as the farmers' protest completes its 7 months. I would like all of you to know that Councillor Swanson was one of the first ones from a major city, Vancouver, who had introduced a motion in support of the farmers. And here I will read her work, which the corpus is so vast, I'll keep it brief at this point. So Councillor Swanson was elected to City Council in 2018 after running with COPE, the Coalition of Progressive Electors. Her priorities are affordable housing for all, harm reduction, not criminalization, poverty reduction. Councillor Swanson has worked to get governments to reduce and end poverty for about 40 years, for which she was awarded the Order of Canada in 2017. She is the author of the book Poor Bashing, The Politics of Exclusion. For the last 12 years, she volunteered at the Carnegie Community Action Project, working for more and better housing, higher welfare rates, and stopping gentrification in Vancouver's downtown east side. In August 2018, Councillor Swanson spent 4 days in jail for blocking access to the Kinder Morgan pipeline. So who better to introduce than a woman who is familiar with protest for cause, and now here today to talk about farmers' protests.
Hey, thank you so much for organizing this and for that nice introduction. Yeah, I too would like to acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and thank them for taking care of it for thousands of years, and acknowledge that they've been subject to horrible racism and genocide. And I commit to trying to reverse this and trying to get some of that land back for them or get them compensated for it. So yeah, I'm Jane Swanson, and I introduced a motion to support the Indian farmers at Vancouver City Hall. And so this is what passed. I'll read it to you. Therefore, be it resolved that Vancouver City Council stands in solidarity with Indian farmers and directs the mayor to write to the provincial and federal governments and asks them to support Indian citizens' rights to expression and liberty and to accelerate the message of concern to the Indian government. And so the mayor did write a letter to Trudeau, and it was actually a pretty good letter, I thought. It said, this is a quote, "The Indian government has made changes to their agricultural laws without adequately consulting farmers' organizations, and these changes are negatively impacting their livelihood by not granting minimum support price in law, allowing traders to stockpile product to create shortages in the marketplace and increase prices to consumers, having the dispute resolution between farmers and corporations under contract farmers handled by a committee rather than the justice system, and being met with state violence and brutality." So Vancouver Council does stand in solidarity with Indian farmers. The letter said, "We believe that lending our voice to support Indian farmers supports the principle that in Canada and around the world, local farmers are indispensable to the social fabric of any country and must be both supported and protected." So that's the motion and the letter that was a result of it to Trudeau. So that's a little bit of pressure to add to all the other pressure that's coming from all over the world. I went to a great sleep out at the art gallery that a bunch of young folks organized in solidarity with the farmers a while back. And they were going to live stream it to the actual farmers in India from here in Vancouver. I thought that was really neat. I understand that one of the reasons the farmers are striking is because they fear the new laws will support basically a corporate takeover of farming in India. In my experience, corporations have one purpose, and that's to make money for the people who own them, not for the people who work for them. So anything we can do to support people to take power away from corporations is good, and governments definitely don't need to be giving more power to corporations. I've organized lots of demonstrations in my life, and it takes a lot of work to organize a demonstration of 30 people for an hour. So when I think about a demonstration of literally hundreds of thousands of people that goes on for months, that tells me that the farmers in India have a really, really important cause, and that everyone who believes in workers' rights and justice should be supporting them. I'd just like to end, I'm not going to speak very long, but I'd like to end by thanking the Indian farmers for showing the rest of the world that a fight for your rights can be so strong and so broad-based. Their fight can be an example to workers throughout the world of what it takes to get rights for workers actually realized. And I hope that this solidarity from other continents helps them. And thanks again to the farmers for working so hard to protect their own rights and to keep corporations from controlling agriculture. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jane. Just so on one note that I wanted to pass along is a message that Harinder Mahil, who's one of the key organizers of this event, received, I think, this morning. And he said, this is what he sent me. I received a text message from a friend in Delhi who spent all day yesterday with the farmers at Delhi's border. Her message reads, and I quote, "The mood is upbeat. They say we won't go back until our demands are met," end quote. So I think this is, in a sense, why we need to support them, but also seek inspiration from their struggle. Thanks very much, Jean. Now I'd like to go on just to note that unfortunately jeopardize was not able to participate this morning. He's involved in, or I guess in this afternoon, whatever the case may be, he's involved in very intensive negotiations. But fortunately, we are very lucky to have Mohammed Al-Asadi, who is the director for the International Department of UNIFOR, specializes in social justice. So welcome, Mohammed. We're very happy to have you with us today. Thank you for coming, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Well, first, let me bring greeting from jeopardize, and unfortunately, as you mentioned, he is not able to join you today as a result of the fact that he is in bargaining with Bombardier. UNIFOR is the largest private sector union in Canada. We represent about 315,000 members in 24 different sectors of the economy here in this country. UNIFOR is proud to stand in solidarity with the farmers in India fighting for fairness and economic justice. At the heart of the demonstration this past month is a struggle that is all too familiar with the workers around the world. That's our continued fight against government deregulation and growing corporate power in all sectors of the economy and public life. The agriculture reforms that India is trying so hard to push through is simply a continuation of neoliberal economic policies that started back in the 80s and the 90s. Policies aimed at delinking governments from economic development and management. Policies that only make corporations more powerful and often at the expense of workers. This is a struggle that UNIFOR knows all too well. We have had our fair share of dust-ups with federal and provincial governments looking to dismantle our social safety nets, privatize our public service, and further deregulate our sectors of work. These same governments support unchecked globalization and free trade agreements. They support tools that outside the work of economic building to private investors, giving them far-reaching power to challenge national policies that protect local industries, workers' rights, and the environment. Supporters of this economic model have made many promises. They argue that leaving everything up to the free market and eliminating government interference will bring nothing but benefits to workers. What we get instead was greater income inequality, erosion of labor rights, increased corporate power, and weaken democracy around the world. What we get instead, and it is safe to say that this experiment has largely been failure for working class people and farmers in particular. Our union spent a lot of time over the past years campaigning to reform the North America Free Trade Agreement, the trade that is the rule book for North America. Right from the outset, NAFTA forced agriculture workers reforms that drove families, farmers out of business, especially in Mexico. It ruins life. It pit family farmers against corporate companies and bosses, which is essentially what's being proposed in India right now. It destroyed the corn market, and it certainly made the life very difficult for Mexican farmers. It It encouraged corporations to consolidate, get bigger, and less local. Today, we are feeling that after the effects of all what happened, Canada's farmers are suffering as a result, and of course, the American and the Mexican farmers. In fact, as we speak, the United States is monitoring 3 trade challenges against Canada's supply management system for dairy and poultry. It is a system that ensures a guaranteed market price for farmed goods and protect farmers against price swings. It prevents over-farming and makes sure farmers get fair value for their products. We fight tooth and nail to protect that system because corporate forces want it dead. As a special advisor to the Canadian negotiations during NAFTA talks, Jerry was able to raise all these issues at every turn. The geography may be different between Canada and India, but underlying struggle is absolutely the same. Many other sectors and industries, UNIFOR members work in have felt firsthand the impact of these policies over the last few decades. It should come as no surprise then that these are the very sectors now facing the most critical challenge. We are seeing increased corporate consultation in the media sector and in continued shift toward digital media. Companies like Google and Facebook are diverting 80% critical and revenue dollars away from Canadian news media sources. As a result, 250 Canadian newspapers have been forced to shut down since 2013. During the pandemic, the horrifying condition in our long-term care facilities came into the public spotlights, a direct result of years of deregulation and privatization in the sector. Private corporations have driven down healthcare worker wages and cut costs in order to boost their profits at the expense of the welfare of seniors. If government heeded our warnings and intervened sooner, more life could have been saved, without a doubt. COVID also revealed that what happened when government removed themselves from developing any kind of domestic industry strategy. Free market supporters were awfully quiet on those early pandemic days when we are searching for basic necessity like PPE and couldn't find any in our country. When we needed COVID vaccine, but don't manufacture any in this country. When we needed, other issues to deal with the pandemic, to keep our auto sectors working, but don't manufacture these in Canada, and so on and so on. We let free market control our economy and lower our standard of living. This cannot be the fate of the Indian farmers. You cannot allow it. We cannot allow it. In learning more about the fight being led by the Indian farmers against government reforms, I couldn't help but find many similarities between our own union struggles and in the auto industry and the farmers. As you may know, UNIFOR was the Canadian Auto Workers Union, and similar to the agriculture sector in India, Canada auto sector was once a strong and thriving industry. We too have seen decline We went from being fifth in the world in terms of auto production to number 12. A trade deal that allowed companies to easily move production to places where labor costs were lower and regulation non-existing. NAFTA was a key reason we saw the Canada Auto Pact eliminated. This was a key piece of legislation that protected Canadian auto industry and assembly jobs. Yet it was successfully targeted by corporations who felt it violated free trade rules. We have felt devastating impact of this loss over since. To this day, we continue to fight hard to ensure we maintain an auto production footprint here in Canada. Workers had dedicated their working lives making GM into a successful and profitable company it is today. We will wait and see if there is a chance to put an end to this chaos. Like the farmers who mobilized through demonstrations and blockade, UNIFOR also took immediate action. We had little choices since nearly all political leaders accepted GM decision and did little to intervene for these workers at our Oshawa plant. It was only because of our efforts, activism, and advocacy that we've managed to get the GM Oshawa plant reopened during last year round of negotiation. So when the news of farmers' strike broke, we did not hesitate in sending our solidarity. We know that the attempt of deregulation of Indian agriculture sector will only put further pressure on Indian farmers that have already seen its share of the economy decline over few decades. In a country where the vast majority of farmers are small, sometimes less than 5 acres of land, there is a little chance for them to dictate terms to large and powerful corporations. Farmers who are barely surviving will only fall deeper into debt and poverty. This becomes even more challenging when you have an industry that has very high rate of corporate concentration, which is the case of the agricultural sector in the US and in Canada. 3 companies, if you can believe it, control 53% of global seed sales. These corporations, these 3 corporate meat packing plants process 85% of Canada beef. And 2 companies, Western Bakeries and Canada Bread, control 80% of the country bread manufacturing. This does not make for a healthy economy. When you have such a domination over the industry, competition is nearly non-existent, and the rules can be easily fixed in your favor. We saw this with Loblaws, Canada's largest grocery chain, when it was found that they had fixing the price of bread in Canada for at least 14 years, a stable food for nearly every household. This is unacceptable and it needs to stop. It's critical that our comrade in India stay strong and hold the line. Let me just close by saying, corporate and political power needs to be challenged always. This is especially true when it threatens workers' livelihoods, because this continued race to the bottom is unsustainable. That is why we are supporting the struggle of farmers in India and all workers' movement around the globe. Right-wing governments and transnational corporations are asserting their influence in over more threatening ways. That is why we firmly believe working class movement need to not only act locally, but to think internationally as well. Only by linking our struggle, we can build and strengthen our resistance to create a world rooted in the principle of social economic justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Al-Sadi. Thank you so much. I am so pumped after listening to Councillor Swanson and you already. It's a pity that we are meeting online. I wish we were in person and you could see that. I would stand up and applaud. It's so powerful and spoken like a true union person. Thank you so much. And it is so important to have this conversation. A person like me who's born and raised in India, who grew up there, the values of justice and social justice inculcated in me, not here in Canada. I have brought them with me from India. So all this speaks so powerfully to me, and I'm sure, like myself, to all those who are attending here and those who would be listening to this talk. Thank you so much. And now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our next speaker, Chuck Puckmeyer, who has been a resident of New Westminster since 1978. He was first elected to City Council in 1996 and served in this role until 2005, when he was elected member of the Legislative Assembly of BC for New Westminster. As the opposition Labour critic in Victoria, Chuck advocated for working families on a host of issues until he stepped down from provincial politics in 2009. Chuck ran and was re-elected to New Westminster Council in 2011 and 2014. Chuck currently serves as chair of the Restorative Justice Committee. He's an active volunteer for many local organizations and has been recognized for his volunteer contributions by receiving the Diamond Jubilee Medal and the Chamber of Commerce Citizen of the Year Award. Chuck is the founder and a volunteer for A Beef with Hunger Society, an organization which raises beef and produce for the HIV food banks, as well as non-profit meal providers. Chuck is a transplant survivor and continues to be a vocal volunteer for BC Transplant. He's a resident of the West End of New Westminster and together with his partner Amber Anderson has 4 adult children. New Westminster was the first city in Canada to express support to the Indian farmer struggle, and some of you may have read this in the chat also. And this happened because Chuck Puckmeyer introduced a motion before the City Council. So it is my honor to introduce Chuck to all of you. Chuck, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Well, that's a little longer than the 4-sentence bio that I sent in, but thank you for that. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this. This is such an important cause. First of all, I want to acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Coquitlam, Katsi, and the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish First Nation, and many other First Nations that came over from Vancouver Island to fish these waters hundreds of years ago. It was so tragic what we've been hearing. I'm not surprised at all what we've been hearing about what has happened at residential schools, and we will continue, I think, to be shocked and alarmed as we hear more findings, I believe, in the future. The struggle of the Indian farmers was something that struck me right away. When I was in the legislature, the provincial government brought in the controls on stopping farm gate sales of meat products, chickens and and pork and beef. You could no longer run process some animals and sell to your neighbor. They did it in the guise of safety. You had to have a certified abattoir. You had to have a veterinarian on site. They made it sound like, farmers are killing their neighbors by selling them meat. And yet, whenever you read about tainted meat, it's the large producers that are putting out a product that many, many people will be affected from. It's never the small farmer. So this was completely done in the same context of what was previously done in the United States. I think we just heard about there used to be literally thousands of meat processing plants in the United States, and now there's maybe a half a dozen very, very large ones, all corporate controlled. After this legislation came in British Columbia, all the small meat processors in the Lower Mainland became getting bought out. People buy them out and close them. They want to control that market, and they want to be able to control where you process your meat. And when you have to travel long distances to get your product to processing, it ends up costing you too much and running you out of business. Eventually, the large players run that market completely, with large processing plants, usually in a province that doesn't have as strong of labor organizations. We saw what happened in the United States. They still have the auctions. The big buyers come in there and they basically buy everything, wink, wink, nod, nod, prior to the doors opening. There's really no public input anymore. The prices are all set and fixed, and the farmers end up getting less. They make less money. They work harder. They struggle harder. They're told what feed to buy for their animals. They're told what animals to buy. They have to buy through the processors if they want to be part of that loop. And it's absolutely devastating to them in the chicken industry in the United States. Again, once this started happening in the United States and a couple of players started controlling that market, the suicide rate of farmers skyrocketed. Kind of what's happening in India right now. Farmers could no longer make ends meet. The yields became smaller and smaller and smaller. You had to buy a certain product. You couldn't do organic. It was too risky. You had to bring in volume. If you spoke out, they would give you an inferior product. Farmers were silenced. They ended up, many farmers selling their farms. People came over from other countries that were being sort of solicited to come over and run farms in the United States at those working conditions that they were used to in other third world countries. And again, it just drove that market into the ground. Communities are damaged. Downtowns and the small farming communities are damaged when there's no economics anymore and it's large corporations running everything. The seed, we already heard about seeds. It was 2018, it was 4 companies, but now I'm here that it's 3. But at one time, just recently, it was 2 from Switzerland, 1 from the United States, and 1 from China that controlled, the lion's share of the seed market in the world. In the United States, 95% of the seeds come through what was Monsanto is now Bayer, a Swiss company. And so little seed producers, there used to be thousands of seed producers, and now there's so few. And those few regulate the prices and they control the prices. They also genetically modify, they sterilize the seeds so that you can't make a seed from the seed, so that you are at the mercy of those companies to purchase those seeds so that you can grow your products. The price of seeds have gone up because they control the market. If your seeds if your field accidentally is germinated by a field next door, and you do have a seed that still produces a crop that is non-sterile, we saw the lawsuit in Canada a few years ago that went on for years and years and years, where the seed companies came after the farmer for a corner of his field being cross-pollinated by a neighboring crop, and they allege that that person actually stole the seeds and planted them illegally without authority. Seeds are being genetically modified so that they can patent. The courts actually rule that you can actually patent a seed. They're being modified mostly so that they don't create new seeds. The product that you grow from those seeds is not healthy. It's not nutritious. Some have genetics of herbicide put into the seeds so that they are more resistant to pests. And so the worry that I have is India, 1.4 million people. It's the last prize of the big seed companies. That is the last prize, to be able to go into a country that has 60% of the population has some tie, whether large or small, in agriculture. To have large corporations go in there and take over that country, and they'll end up with maybe 5 or 10% of the population having a hand in agriculture. It will be absolutely devastating to one of the largest populations in the world. And so standing up with the farmers here is important, especially the fact that we didn't stand up to the farmers here when the governments brought in those legislations. Nationally, the governments have brought in legislation that has just made corporate takeovers of farm and amalgamations of farm large and small farms wiped out. We didn't speak up when they did this in the United States, and we saw the devastating impacts that are happening there. And so it's natural for people with a social conscience and people with a background in labor to say, yeah, we need to stand up with our brothers and sisters in India and say, we support your fight, and we will do everything we can here in Canada to fight, not along your side, but certainly we'll be vocal. We'll make resolutions to council like we did here and Vancouver did. And we will continue to put pressure on our governments to speak out. My resolution actually adds a piece that states that asks the Trudeau government to even consider economic sanctions against India if this continues. Of course, we got a very weak response back from the Prime Minister's office, and we've heard very little from the Canadian government with regards to this issue. So the fight goes on. We have to be vocal, and we have to support the Indian farmers. Last night, I showed up and spoke at the sleep out in the art gallery, Vancouver Art Gallery. It was so great to see so many young people and young women that are activists on this cause. It was really refreshing to see the activism of young people on this cause. And if it's a fraction of that in India, which I know it's not, I think they're in good hands to turn this over. And I sure hope they do so. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And I'll stand by for questions if there are any later.
It's a little bit of a delay. Thank you very much. That was a fascinating talk. And I think you really exemplified in your remarks what's hanging in the balance here. I think you also are suggesting a strategy that might bear some fruit at some point. I think the Indian government is very sensitive to this issue, very worried about criticism, and this was exemplified by a report in the CBC on June the 19th, which was really kind of about the Indian consulate in Toronto trying to stop GTA teachers from giving lessons about the farmer strike. And really trying to frame this in a communal sort of way and saying this is, some dangerous propaganda is being spread by teachers and so on. So there's a real sensitivity that I think we might be able to take advantage of in our solidarity efforts. Anyway, let's move on to our last but not least speaker, Stephen von Sykowski, who's the president at the Vancouver District Labour Council. Vancouver City Council is one of the major labor councils in Canada to openly express support for the farmers, and that happened largely because of Stephen's efforts and his leadership. So welcome, Stephen. You have the floor. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. like to start off by just acknowledging that I am joining the Zoom today from the traditional unceded territory of the Coquitlam and Coquitlam First Nations, and really thank the organizers for inviting me here to speak this afternoon. As was mentioned, I'm the president of the Vancouver District Labour Council. We are a regional labour body chartered by the Canadian Labour Congress, but originally formed in 1889. We represent workers in the city of Vancouver, North Vancouver, Richmond, West Vancouver, and some other surrounding areas, approximately 60,000 unionized workers. Now, the main sort of areas of focus for our work as Labour Council are, of course, labor education, political action, supporting our affiliate unions. But we also have a long and storied history of engaging in international solidarity, and I'm very proud of that continuing legacy, which continues, among other ways, through our support of the farmers in India and their struggle. I've been asked to comment a bit about why our Labour Council supports the farmers' cause and how we see it as connected to political organizing work here in Canada. And I think, really to explore that, one has to start from, why does or should the labor movement be involved in international solidarity? For a lot of people here today, presumably that seems like an obvious question, but it is something that is asked out there. And at the end of the day, when you stop to think about it, it really should be a given. After all, with the exception, of course, of the Indigenous peoples of these lands, Canada is populated by immigrants and their descendants. And so when one raises a question of international solidarity in a country like Canada, the truth is that right here in our own communities and our own unions are people that came from whatever country you may be talking about. It doesn't matter what country that is, and their descendants, and people who still have families and friends who live there as well. So there's a very real, direct, organic connection between our own unions and communities and any given question of international solidarity. But nonetheless, the question does, persist. There is the feeling that exists of some that something that's happening somewhere else in the world shouldn't be our issue or our concern. At the end of the day, though, and it seems simplistic, and in a way it is, but I think it is. It couldn't be any other way, or shouldn't be any other way. First and foremost, the labor movement should be engaged in international solidarity because labor movement is a class movement. It's a working class movement. The working class is global. Borders don't divide that class or our interests. And at the end of the day, a worker anywhere in the world who is fighting deserves our support. So whether that means a big or small organization, or whether there's the ability to direct large memberships, organizational resources, or simply a bit of our own time and energy, simply our voice, it's important that we do the things we can do to support these kinds of causes wherever they are in the world. I think, not only do we have the responsibility to stand with our fellow working people, including farmers, wherever they may be, but also a responsibility in that Canada is very much involved in countries all around the world, including in India, and Canadian corporations do stand to benefit at the expense of working people, including farmers, as a result of draconian reforms like these. Farmers, of course, everyone is aware here, are standing against legislation which deregulates agricultural markets and favors corporate interests over those of small food producers. Measures such as removing minimum support pricing, which threatens the livelihood of farming families, threatens to open the door to the possibility of massive takeovers of farmland by multinational corporations. And in fact, privatization is the explicit aim of the reforms. Farming is one of the most important sectors, of course, in the Indian economy, accounting for more than 40% of the workforce. And so it's not a minor and innocent sort of modernization, as it has sometimes been painted in media, but really a massive assault on the livelihoods of a large portion of the population. And it's also important to say it's not an isolated move. During the pandemic, there have been several measures implemented in India which weaken workers' rights. In September of last year, 3 major pieces of legislation were expedited through both houses of parliament: the Industrial Relations Code, Code on Social Security, and the Occupational Health, Safety and Working Conditions Code. And these new labor laws replace 44 central labor laws that largely favor employers at the expense of workers' rights and protections. They include extensive amendments to lower labor standards, to extend the number of working hours a day from 8 to 12, normalizing fixed-term employment, exempting companies from labor inspections, and even outright suspension of labor laws as a so-called economic stimulus because of the pandemic. So really utilizing the pandemic to undermine workers' rights. And certainly we've seen that here at home as well. And just as an aside, I mean, there's a very clear case of it playing out right here today in the Lower Mainland with hotel workers who, are being forced from their jobs, again, by employers seeking to utilize the pandemic to increase their profitability. So these reversals in labor legislation, combined with the high rates of unemployment, influx of precarity due to the pandemic-induced economic downturn, these things together have generated a fear of a new form. It's being called a new form of modern slavery taking hold, wherein workers are forced to compete in a race to the bottom, surrendering the dignity of their work in order to survive. And that is really what can be at stake if these kinds of reforms are allowed to go unchallenged and combined with the type of precarity and unemployment that is occurring because of the pandemic. And this kind of assault on working people during COVID is not unique either to India. Labor Central, by the name of Industrial, reports alarming attacks on labor rights across South Asia. The International Trade Union Confederation has reported strikes being banned or restricted in 85% of countries that they surveyed, an increase of 25% with their most recent pre-COVID survey. They also reported in the Global Rights Index worsening situations in many countries, including Honduras, Egypt, Turkey, and other countries. And so, while some believe that the course of history sort of naturally flows towards progress, the truth is that powerful forces are guiding things in the opposite direction, and whether that be in India, in Canada, or elsewhere in the world, towards an increasing centralization of wealth and power in the hands of a small oligarchic minority, while the real incomes, rights, and living standards of the majority are driven ever downward. So in this, when you look at that, it's clear that capital takes a global view, that while it shows up in different forms owing to the conditions of different countries, the push to reduce workers' wages and working conditions and maximize profitability is a global one. It's one of the key ways that is occurring is through the elimination of any and all fetters to that single-minded drive towards profit. And this, of course, includes union busting. It includes privatization in all of its many forms, and also deregulation, either directly through the elimination of policies aimed at the protection of workers, communities, and the environment, or indirectly through the creation and exploitation of new loopholes in existing regulations. We see it in India with agricultural and labor law reforms. We see it here in North America with the rise of the gig economy, the undermining of employment standards, the imposition of right to work laws, and more. At the same time, of course, we see resistance being increasingly met with enhanced surveillance, with repression, and with violence. That has unfortunately been very much the case in the instance of the farmers in India. While we often conflate capitalism with parliamentary democracy, history shows that around the world, it's a highly adaptable system that can't be necessarily tied to any particular form of governance, but can adapt itself to many types. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is that the use of violent repression, if gone unchallenged, continues to increase. And if we allow that to go unchallenged, we not only turn our backs on the victims of that violence, but we also allow for the normalization of repressive tactics, which may next be turned on us. So farmers have been peacefully demonstrating in defense of their land and their livelihoods. And they've been met with brutal police repression, including roadblocks, violence, arrests, mass detentions. They've engaged in restricting access to protest websites, shutting down the internet, censoring social media content. Protesters have been attacked also with tear gas, water cannons, and batons. Amnesty International has also reported that protest sites resemble a war zone after the police erected metal and wire barricades, as well as concrete and stone boulders. More than 2,000 iron nails reportedly were strewn on roads leading to the site of the protests, and police have allegedly even blocked access to portable toilets constructed by the farmers and will not allow street cleaners to clear away growing mounds of garbage. So really a thorough attempt to end the protests through violence, repression, the creation of unsafe conditions, and whatever other means that they can utilize. These violations of human rights remind us that the presence of parliamentary democracy does not in itself guarantee human rights being respected. Throughout Canada's history, we've seen many examples of this as well. I recently spoke at commemoration of the Battle of Ballantine, where longshore workers were similarly attacked, to name one example. At the end of the day, we don't exist in a bubble. Of course, we find ourselves as part of a global system faced with a global strategy that aims to undermine our rights and our interests and benefit the wealthy few. Therefore, we must also take a global view and stand together across borders, saying that what we desire for ourselves, we wish and we demand for all. I know that I'm probably a little bit short on time, but I just want to, say that this is a very inspiring movement, what we're witnessing happening right now in India. It is perhaps the largest mobilization ever seen. They've been sustained since September of last year. And, they continue despite this vicious repression that was mentioned. And so really, truly a massive and inspiring movement, one that we can be proud to support, and one that we can take inspiration from ourselves. And when it's victorious, it will be another demonstration, once again, of really the power of people when they organize and fight back against what seems like very difficult odds. So let's stand in solidarity with the farmers of India. Their fight is a big one. It's a significant battle and really part of a truly global struggle for the rights and empowerment of working people. And when we fight together, we win together. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephen. We don't have a huge amount of time now, and we're at we're about at an hour, so we've got about a half an hour remaining for discussion and questions. I sort of lost track of where we were, but we do have about a half an hour now. I'd just like to sort of take something up vis-a-vis the question that we have received, and it comes right out of your talk, Stephen, when you talk about kind of a new modern form of slavery and the sort of race to the bottom, which entails workers being pit against one another. You see this quite well documented in the films of Ken Loach. So you see it within the global north, but especially you have workers in the global north being played off against workers in the global south. And that's why this kind of solidarity is so important. But the question that we have goes to whether or not, because the farmers tend to be overwhelmingly Sikh and Punjabi, the question about where their Hindu, Muslim, and tribal brothers and sisters stand. And I understand from Harinder, he has communicated with me saying that in the encampments on the outskirts of Delhi, you see a kind of multi-denominational, multi-ethnic kind of coalition. So it's not just Sikhs who are taking a very leading role here, but they're not the only groups represented. I think this is really important because I think the way that the politics of identity have played themselves out has been really not to challenge, but to only buttress this neoliberal order, which, as you said, Stephen, I think is reflected in all of the talks, to really divide people against themselves and make it that much easier for this sort of global capitalist class to maintain and deepen its hegemony. So we have some other questions here from Dolores Chu. How to broaden across Canada the solidarity of movement that makes linkages palpable. And just a kind of housekeeping question: will this be recorded? Yes, it will be recorded, and there will be that will be made available later. But let's go to this question about how to broaden across Canada the solidarity movement. So maybe we could go in reverse order, just to make sure everybody has a chance if they like to address the question. Maybe going back to Jean, and then working our way back.
Yeah, well, I'd be happy to get the motion out to other municipalities. I don't know, maybe Chuck, have we talked about taking this to I guess it's too late to take it to the UBCM.
Yeah, I won't be attending this year, so I'm not sure if that was one of the resolutions, but I think the resolution window just closed. So yeah. I'm sure if someone put it in now, it would probably pass on the floor.
Yeah.
As a late resolution.
Maybe I could try doing that. And then there's other provinces too. So yeah, I'm eager to share our motion if any other municipalities want to pick up on it.
Would anybody else like to come in? Mohammed, Stephen?
Sure. I mean, I don't know across the country how many labor councils have expressed their support so far. I suspect it's been a few, but there are many labor councils across the province and certainly across the country. And I'd be happy to assist with reaching out to some of those if there are some that have not yet, because I believe that I believe that there would be support. I think when we talk to rank and file labor activists, that they get this stuff. They realize the importance of supporting their fellow workers and working people all across the world. And so that's, one of the gathering places for those activists from across many different unions. And so I think that's an important place to raise this issue.
Would anybody else like to come in, or we can move to the next question? There's a question from Muna. Okay, Muna Prasad. I can't see Muna's question. Maybe she could put it into the question answer. Yeah, so we had that was a question on organizing solidarity. Prabjot, do you have a question for the panelists?
One question that I had, it's already been addressed, but I wanted to ask you about something that has been touched, state repression. If anything is talked about outside of India, for example, even within India these days, in many cases, it is automatically deemed as anti-national. So any voice of dissent. So this whole notion of voice of dissent and its significance, I was wondering if you wanted to add, because I could talk about it myself. Having grown up in India, we were constantly taught in our schools about South Africa, anti-apartheid, and ANC and SWAPO. We grew up with that, or solidarity with the PLO. This was part of our curriculum and school discussion, which was nothing like the school system here. We had certain set things, and there you moved on after discussing certain points. Yeah, and similarly, we have read about all sorts of solidarity actions coming from outside of India for various movements that were going on in India, be it freedom struggle or subsequently. But the intervention that to which Sameer referred earlier on as the CBC story and against a school district in Ontario, where a parent complained about what was being taught. So state intervention outside of the country, and I was just wondering, how do you see people's morale being upbeat, as has been mentioned, that farmers sitting in such heat of Delhi. I'm very familiar with it, so I cannot. I am actually feeling it here in Abbotsford, at the moment, and I only wonder how they are sitting out there in the open in the trolleys. So my salute to them, kudos to them. So in that kind of an atmosphere where state repression tries to quash not just voice of dissent, but any voice that tries to question, how does international solidarity pan out then? What would you do with that? How would you support?
I have a bit of an example. In last year, I made a motion to oppose the Citizen Amendment Act in India. It was really evident that there was some very high-end organization against the motion. I received emails from the Consul General. The mayor received a phone call from the Consul General. I don't recall getting more emails. I mean, both for and against, but the against my motion ones all seem to be a template. They all seem to be that somebody had really organized something wide-reaching, hundreds and hundreds of emails that were almost all identical. And the interesting thing I found, and then COVID hit right after the motion, and we changed the notice of motion policy, and it sat on the paper for months before we actually were able to debate it. And in those months, it was relentless. I had never seen that many emails, mechanical emails. Now, on this resolution on the Indian farmers, virtually nothing in opposition, and which tells me that even some of the very pro-Modi Canadians are finding it very difficult to step out and support this legislation. And so it makes me optimistic. There isn't an organized. I'm not being contacted by the consulate. The mayor hasn't been called. It sounds to me like there's probably some people in lower levels of power that are wishing that this will go away, that they're going to be impacted. We're seeing in some of the elections that are happening now that it is impacting the ruling government in some of those elections, and so. We have one of the temples that was I was told were more pro-Modi than not pro-Modi, and one of the Sikh temples. They're not coming out in support of this motion. So I see a real difference between what was happening then with CAA and what's happening now with the farmers. I'm seeing a groundwell of support. Some on the road, some we see in communities, usually communities that have a lot of farming. But I'm optimistic that the way the lack of opposition to our resolutions is very, very promising to me.
Jean and then Stephen.
Yeah, the same thing happened in Vancouver. I tried getting a motion in about the repression before the farmers, and there was a huge bunch of emails we got speaking out against it. And as a result, I was sure that it wouldn't pass. In fact, I didn't even think I could get a seconder for it, so I withdrew it. And the second time, with the farmers' motion, we actually had 9 speakers and 8 of them were against it. But, and I think a lot of them were taking their orders from the government, the Indian government. But then there was an interval of a few weeks between when the vote happened and when the speakers happened. And in that interval, the people who supported the farmers started writing in. And there were some really heartwarming letters then. And I think that's what helped us to get the vote that we got.
Thank you. Stephen.
Yeah, I think, I think we shouldn't underestimate the impact that international solidarity can have. I think, similar to how, as I mentioned, corporations have a global strategy, and we have to as well. They understand the importance of international, and you see it in the sense that governments will attack countries that are not in line with their geopolitical strategy or whatever else it may be on human rights issues or whatever else, while completely ignoring those who are allies and their abuses, because they know that doing that does have an impact on people's thinking about the issues that are going on, and on undermining the confidence of those who are working on whatever that issue is. I mean, I think in this case, to have such a prolonged and difficult fight, any amount of support we can give to try to keep that strength going, we should. I think that it is meaningful, and that that shouldn't be underestimated.
I'd just like to read out a comment by Dolores Chu, who posed a question earlier about cross-Canada solidarity, but she sort of elaborated on her point. I think it's a really important one. She says, I'm Montreal-based, and there's a divide, Quebec and the rest of Canada. Also, the demographic here, not the same number of folk from India and Punjab. It would be great if unions can push this. Those of us working here in Montreal on the issue are a handful, but there is a need to do a lot more public education. So if the labor movement can amplify this, so it registers on the national Canadian stage much more, this would be amazing. So I suppose really to have it resound in Quebec seems to be the point here. And I think this is a really important one. I don't know if the panelists had any thoughts about the specificity of Quebec and the need to engage with unions and political organizations in that province, but I can leave that open and see if we have any other. Vinod. If you had any thoughts on that, but I'd also invite Vinod, who has his hand up, to simply, if you could, just put your question in the Q&A. That's the only way it's going to work. Good. And if there are no further questions, I'm wondering if now we just want to take a few minutes to wrap and some final thoughts amongst the panelists. Unless, Prabhat, you have any other thoughts that you'd like to raise?
I think, Vinodji, you can type your question. I saw that your hand is raised, and earlier on Munna Prasad also had their hand raised, but there's only type in question in either in chat or Q&A. There's no microphone. So while they are doing that, I will just, I also wanted to, which of course everyone possibly is aware about the 7 months that, with which we began today's gathering. It's 7 months of the protest, and also the date is very significant because yesterday it marked 46 years of the emergency that was declared in 1975 by the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. And so there is this whole conversation about the farmers' protest, of course, with the slogan that save agriculture, save democracy. So, which is a very significant comment. And I constantly revert back to this whole notion of democracy as to what democracy means and what democracy stands for. The ability to speak, the ability to voice out your agreements and disagreements. That is what democracy is. And I find that it's obvious that we are having this discussion because those very norms of democracy are suspended to some extent for many. They are not openly available to people, and that is where solidarity really comes into play. I see that that Vinod's question has come. So Vinodji, thank you and for your patience. So the question is: we have been very glad to have Canadian Labour support to farmers' cause in this issue discussed internally within union. So is it?
Maybe more of a comment.
Yeah, it's sort of more of a comment than a question. So
We do have a question from Sheila Arif. So I'll just read that out. Thank you so much for this panel, very informative. I'm wondering if there are ideas on connecting this global solidarity in relation to farmer and labor struggles with struggles against false climate solutions, which are detrimental to people, but are being sold to progressives. I mean, obviously, when we look at the global level in terms of labor struggles, the other sort of pressing global issue is, of course, global climate change. And there's obviously connections to be drawn here in terms of solidarity, and particularly the way in which global climate change is going to disproportionately affect those perhaps who have contributed least to the problem, which is to say people in the global south. Any thoughts on climate change? It does take us a little bit, afield in terms of not directly addressing the farmers, but it is certainly related. If people had any thoughts about the climate emergency,
I think this is one of the reasons that this battle is so important, because it is becoming more difficult in all countries to farm. You need all hands on deck. You need to be able to buy the seeds you want to buy. You need to be able to produce, even if you're producing for your community only or for your family. You can't be left at the mercy of large corporations when your crop failures are on the rise everywhere. Canada, United States, India, Europe. We can't have corporate conglomeration of that industry. As we get into a more critical stages, as we are heading into more critical stages of climate change, we need all options of producing food for our families, and limiting options should be not an option, and that's why this is such an important fight.
the key food security issue. That's how it connects to climate change. Yeah, good. Any other thoughts?
I just have a question. In India, the farmers, and in different regions, and this should not be considered only as though it is a Punjab issue. Farmers have come from different regions, and those who are far away could not travel to Delhi. They took out road marches and protests in their respective regions, whether it was in the Maidans in Bombay or long march from Nasik and so on and so forth. Different regions they were there. But one thing I noted was that reference to the revolutionaries, during India's freedom struggle, during the freedom movement, the young revolutionaries who emerged on the scene in the late teens and in the 20s and jolted the nation out of its stupor and to work towards complete independence. Those people are emerging as heroes of the farmers, Bhagat Singh and his comrades particularly, and their writings have been inspiring for many. I was wondering, in the Canadian context, when you look at movements, are there such figures, they're not necessarily freedom struggle, whatever, who are the figures that at times the union leaders or the farmers have reached out to?
Well, we have, Sharon Gill was very active in this community. I know Raj Chauhan, who's one of my former colleagues in Victoria, Speaker of the House, very active in putting farmers' rights on the table. Unfortunately, when governments changed, those were all slashed, and we see what happens when farmers don't have rights, unsafe vehicles, fatalities, horrible working conditions. And so it's a really difficult one. They need to be organized. They need to have rights. They need to have favorable governments that protect them, because it's one of the most, I think it's one of the most abused catchments of workers in the world is farming. It's sad. It's sad how people are abused in that industry.
Well, on that note, just make reference to Sven Robinson, who points out the solidarity work that he and others engaged with in the past with the California farm workers, and Cesar Chavez played such a key role, and it was an inspiration to so many. Good. Any final thoughts now? I think we're probably at the end now of our session. People just like to say a few words to sum up, and then we can bring this to a conclusion. Yeah, Prabhat.
Yes, quickly I noted that Vinodji's follow-up point there, that my question was, is the farmers' issue discussed within Canadian unions? Very interesting question as to, I'm imagining, lunch break and people are sitting in the lunchroom. What is the conversation going on, so...
Yeah, I found it really interesting listening to everybody and people making the connections between what's happening here in Canada and with the US trying to undermine farmers' marketing boards, and how it's actually really all connected, and we just have to fight corporate farming. And I just want to send my best wishes and the gratitude to the farmers in India who are doing this, and I hope we can support them in as many ways as possible.
Stephen, put your hand up.
Yeah, just in response to the question about the issue being discussed within unions. I mean, I think it'll vary quite broadly depending on from union to union and local to local and so forth. But just again to my comments on one of the earlier questions about labor councils, it's sort of one of the place where those local activists from all across different unions come together. And so, the great thing about that is you may not have heard about it yet in your own local union. You might hear about it there and bring it back to your local union. And so the importance of those types of organizations that bring folks together across different industries and different organizations as a place to get the word out about these kinds of struggles.
Thank you. Chuck, and then Mohammed.
Thanks. I just want to thank the organizers for putting this on. It's such an important topic, and I think the more that we discuss this and talk about it, the more that we educate people, the more that we'll be able to address this corporatization of our industry. So thanks again for having me, and thanks to all the panelists. I've really enjoyed this talk.
Thank you. Mohammed.
With respect to the question to whether we had conversations about the farmers' struggle in India, we certainly did within our union. We do have many members in the West Coast, local one, for example, who do have relatives who are participating in the fight now in India. And we will continue to support the struggle of the farmers in every means possible. And we will work with you and other organizations to make sure that there is a good strategy out there to provide solidarity to them at this difficult time. And thank you so much for the invitation on behalf of jeopardize and UNIFOR.
Thanks very much. Prabhat, over to you for any final thoughts.
Final thoughts. I think solidarity, of course, as has been demonstrated, is such a significant aspect. I will fall back on indigenous practice of all my relations, and as I, several years ago, tried to understand what this phrase "all my relations" means. All my relations. At the outset, the first time when I heard it in 1993, when I came to Canada, I just thought that it is sort of a community kinship thanks. But that is very limiting. That is not what it means. It means one is connected to, one's family, one's ancestors, one's kins, immediate community, extended community, not only humans all across the earth, but also flora, fauna, animals. So there is a connection in the universe. So I really feel that solidarity is a very significant concept. We show solidarity to each other. We go from smallest actions when personal level solidarity is significant. So for this movement where farmers are talking about that ab masla roti ka hai, it's a matter of our livelihood. It is matter of their food. So if food itself is going to be taken away, then what will we do? So I think it is very important for us to stand in solidarity, demonstrate our support through words. Words are considered to be very powerful things, isn't it? That is why voices of dissent, we always, people like us who are in teaching field, we are constantly trying to analyze why different character was taught by this, that, and the other. So here the fear of words is so powerful. So I would urge all of us to continue to speak and show support, and do hope that the three laws that the farmers have deemed as the black laws, Kale Kanun, or the black laws, will be taken back by the government of India, and so that the farmers can go back home. The dark days, the Prime Minister, that is Prime Minister Modi, referred to emergency as dark days, and a time when that led to the suspension and erosion of institutions. And to an extent, I think everyone has read in the newspaper columns and otherwise on television channels and people's experiences that voices have been silenced, people have been coerced not to speak, and their democratic rights are suspended. So let us hope that such dark days are not equated to the time that is going on now. So that's all that I would say.
Thank you very much, Prabhat. So on behalf of all of the co-sponsoring organizations, I'd like to thank the panelists for your wonderful presentations. Thank you, Prabhat, for co-hosting with me. Thank you again, Ajay Bhardwaj and Harinder Mahil, for putting this together. And I'd also like to thank Devin Gillen, who is our videographer and is recording this, and he's done many of our previous events. And they're all to be found on the Institute's website. You can go there, and there are so many videos. I think that would be of interest to folks here today. And thank you to the audience for coming and for your excellent questions and comments. And I hope to see you all again at some future event. We're in the process of organizing another event on the farmer strike, where we want to try and hear from people on the ground in India, from the farmers themselves, from journalists and academics, to put this into a socio-economic, political economic framework so we can better understand what's happening there. So we'll have that out shortly, I'm hoping. So thank you very much, and try to stay cool in this extremely sweltering time. So all the best. Bye.